In this video, we're going to go over Notebook B Entry 4 from your Google Classroom. Should be the same in every Google Classroom, but when you first click on the class, make sure you click on Classwork and go down to the week that we are in. We are in week 7 because today is 4/11/22, and to find this video, you would have gone through the videos links, clicked it, now you're here. So for this entry, Notebook B Entry 4, I'm just going to kind of talk over this one instead of rewriting it again because I can't get my software to work this morning. But normally I would start with like a blank page, and it would be us going through the entry like we do in class. So I would, write it as we go, talk through it, but I'm just going to look over this one, and you will write it as I go through it. But anyway, like I said, this is Notebook B Entry 4, and we're talking about inverse trigonometry. What that means is an inverse is something that goes like backwards or the other direction in math. So our regular trig functions that you're used to are sine, cosine, and tangent. So these regular ones, let's see how well I can write on this, would be like sine, cosine, and tangent, the ones you're used to using. What those guys do is they help you find, they will help you find a side length by taking an angle and putting it inside the teacher explain it as like a machine where the trig function eats the angle and spits out a side. Today we're going to talk about something called inverse trig functions, which are they're still sine, cosine, and tangent, but you may have noticed them on your calculator as something like this. It'll say sine with a -1 power, cosine with a -1 power, and tangent to the -1st power. What that symbolizes is an inverse. So we would call this inverse sine, inverse cosine, inverse tangent. And what it does, it's the opposite. You can take a side length, put it inside of this inverse trig function, and it'll tell you the angle that it took to get there. So today, your main goal is to find missing angles. So your main, oops, that don't work very well. Your main goal today is find angles using trig instead of sides. Oops. Okay. Let me see if I can scroll down. There we go. So when you see this sine to the -1st power, you say inverse sine function. Same thing with cosine, the inverse cosine, the inverse tangent, so forth and so on. And how they work, we're still using SOHCAHTOA. Some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on apples. So this SOH means, sine, opposite, and hypotenuse. The only thing that changes from our original trig function is that the theta is over here now, and we put the opposite over hypotenuse inside of the function. So these two things have switched place in our inverse functions, but it's still SOH, CAH, TOA. So if I do inverse sine of opposite over hypotenuse, it's going to tell me the angle. Same thing for those. Be sure that you are writing this stuff down, pausing the video as you need to. How we're going to use this is you'll be given a triangle, and you will have two sides already, but you won't know the angle. And you're going to use the appropriate inverse function to find the missing angle in degrees. So since we are using degrees, I want to make sure you remember how to change your calculator. On your calculator, you want to make sure that this does not say RAD, that it says DEG for degree. I'm in the wrong mode. I'm in radian. So what I do is I go to my home screen, and I go to my settings, then my document settings. From there, I can find angle, change it from radian to degree, and say OK. then when I go back to calculate or go back to my scratch pad, you'll see that I'm now in degree. So now that I know my calculator's right, let's look at this. I'm given a right triangle and I know two sides. And the first, what I want to find is this missing angle. So I have to use inverse trigonometry. And how I know what to use is by labeling my sides as either opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always across from the 90-degree angle. So in this case, I had a hypotenuse. And then, let's see, here's my theta. And my theta tells me where my opposite and my adjacent are. So I look all the way across the triangle from this one, and I have a 3, which means that would be considered my opposite because he's opposite and across from that angle. Now, this one down here would be adjacent because he is next to that angle. But I'm not going to use that one right now. I'm just going to use the opposite and hypotenuse. So, if that is true, then I need to think of my inverse functions. And who uses opposite and hypotenuse? It's inverse sine. So that's why I chose inverse sine, put the opposite over hypotenuse inside, and it equals the theta. Replacing the O and the H with what they were, so the 3 over the 5. Inverse sine of 3/5 should equal my angle. At this point, I will put inverse sine of 3/5 into my calculator because its theta is alone, it's by itself, it's solved, like last time we solved for X or Y or something like that. So, I will go to my calculator, click on trig, inverse sine of 3 over 5 is 36.9 degrees. So 36.9 degrees. Now on number 2 and 3, I do the same. I'm going to identify my sides so I can pick my trig function. And in this case, I do have a hypotenuse again because it's across from the 90 degree. And then I have, let's look, that would be opposite, which makes this one my adjacent. Now, since I need the A and the H, I would pick cosine because it uses the A and the H. So I would do inverse cosine of my adjacent over my hypotenuse. It's going to equal my angle. And I replace adjacent with 18, hypotenuse with 20. So now I need to type in cosine inverse cosine of 18 over 20. So inverse cosine of 18 over 20 is about 25.8 degrees. Then I'll do the same for the last one. Now, part of your assignment, I will be honest with you, is going to end up having a third side. So you actually get to choose which of the 3 sides that you would like to use for your functions. So that'll let you can literally choose any of them. So the last 10 on your assignment, you are going to have a third side, and you just pick 2 of those 3 sides that you'll use for your function. But anyway, this one would be the opposite, that would be adjacent, which would be inverse tangent, opposite over adjacent, inverse tan 16 over 17, becomes 66.4 degrees in the calculator. So finding the angles of these, I think, are a little easier than finding the sides because they're already solved for theta, and you don't have to do any solving as far as like dividing or multiplying stuff through. But make sure you have these notes wrote down for your entry. Once you have them all wrote down, you've watched this video, then you'll go back into Google Classroom. Make sure you're under classwork in week 7. Click on your inverse trigonometry worksheet. It'll tell you it corresponds to notebook B entry 4. Open it up and you will begin working. You'll complete this on your own sheet of paper, but you got to show me some work. And what I mean by show work for one of these is just kind of how we did it on the notebook entry, where I need to figure out I'm trying to find an angle. They call it a question mark instead of a theta, but you can keep using theta. What sides do I have? Well, hypotenuse, don't have him. I do have an opposite, though, and I do have an adjacent. It's supposed to be an A. So who uses the O in the A? It was the inverse tan. So to show my work, I would say like it was inverse tan. I know that it's opposite over adjacent, so I could go ahead and put 12 over 30. And then what does that equal? Well, I'd go to my calculator, type in inverse tan, 12 over 30. What does it give me as a degree for my answer? So this right here and the final answer would be good enough for your showing your work, whatever it gave you for theta.